Thank you for downloading this RealAgriculture podcast. Excite your crops with inputs from Excite Bio. Access nitrogen and phosphorus with Excite Bio's lineup of inoculants and ag biologicals. Since 2010, they've been helping farmers harness the power of the soil. Learn more at excitebio.ca. That's XITEBIO.ca.
It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio.
And welcome to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio Channel 147, Sirius XM. I am your host for the day, Lyndsey Smith. It is, of course, Tuesdays with Lyndsey, so I'm super glad to be with you here today on November 12th. It is, of course, going to be a bit of a Muse Day, kind of, sort of. Yesterday being Remembrance Day, it is a stat holiday for some, but not all. And so the RealAg team here, some of us had the day off, some of us didn't, so everything's a bit of a jumble, I'll be honest. But I do hope that each and every one of you got a chance to pause at the 11th hour and honor those who have fought for our freedom and for Canada. All right, today's show is jam-packed. Super excited for it. You're going to hear from Peter Pete Johnson and Joanna Follings from our latest wheat school on wheat row spacing. I've also got a super cool discussion between John Duynisveld and Amber Bell about including seaweed or kelp in cattle rations and the impact it has on, when including kelp, how they can actually decrease methane emissions by the cattle. Super cool. Keeping along with the livestock theme, but thinking more about the other end and what we can do with manure in the fall. I've also pulled a clip from the Agronomists from last week where we talked about fall field work, and a big part of that was making those tough decisions at times on if you should spread manure or not, and if you do, what you should do, whether you should incorporate or not, etc. So I've pulled a clip from that. That you'll hear Christine Brown from the Ontario Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Agribusiness, Glen Arnold from Ohio State University, and Curtis Cavers from AAFC in Manitoba. We also have a product spotlight, so you'll hear that as well. We'll be talking about some cool new opportunities for American producers of canola. That's very important there. All right, so stick around for that. Now, before we hop to a break and get into today's show, I did want to just give you a heads up on several of the news stories we're following, of course, this week that if you head on over to RealAgriculture.com, you can read about them, listen before you necessarily see it or hear it, I suppose, here on the show. But we did get an update. So yesterday, so on Monday, we did have the Port of Montreal. We had a lockout begin. So you may remember from last week, we talked about a strike happening at two of the ports at about 10 a.m. this morning. Steve McKinnon, our labor minister, did hold a press conference and has in fact mandated binding arbitration for both the Port of Montreal and the Port of Vancouver. A big thanks to Calvin for reporting on this one, but these are the details we have. We do know that the Labour Minister McKinnon has directed the Canada Industrial Relations Board to order the resumption of all operation at the ports and to impose final and binding arbitration at both ports as well, stating that negotiated agreements are the best way forward, but we must not allow other Canadians to suffer when certain parties do not fulfill their responsibilities to reach an agreement. In the meantime, existing collective agreements will remain in place for all the employees that were either locked out or on strike. This dispute, of course, to remind you, 1,200 longshore workers at the Port of Montreal and over 700 dock supervisors at ports in BC. And that, of course, Port of Vancouver and Port of Prince Rupert, as we noted. We did certainly see an escalation. That escalation yesterday certainly did seem to spark some interest, of course, from Parliament and showing that, this is potentially over $1 billion of goods per day being waylaid. It is absolutely imperative that our ports work and function, especially now, just after the busy harvest season and ahead of the holiday season. But really, anytime. Right? All right. So we'll keep you up to date on what's happening there. But as we understand it, those ports should be back, or staff should be back to work by tomorrow. We'll see how long it takes for them to get back up and running. We also got word just early in the week, and we don't have a ton of details on this, but digging into it, that we did have our first human case of avian influenza confirmed in BC's Fraser Valley. The suspicion is this was passed directly from a bird, obviously not human to human contact, which is important. And this is a youth. So this is someone under the age of 18. We don't have a ton of details on this one yet, but it is definitely a story we'll be following along. As we've covered on this show before, the instance of avian influenza being found in other species other than birds, of course, is troubling. But it's that very important change in the virus that could make it transmit from human to human. That would, of course, be a very serious progression of this disease. At this point, this just appears to be avian influenza contracted from an animal. So not dissimilar to what we saw, of course, with the positive cases down in the States, where those who have been working with dairy cattle had also been exposed and had been infected with the virus. So we'll be keeping tabs on that one as well. Last week, we had so much amazing coverage on the Trump win of the U.S. election. Of course, we still have a few pieces that you may not have heard that are on the site. But one of the other things that Sean Haney did is he and Justin Funk in the last Canadian Farmer Sentiment Index also asked about a change in government in Canada and how farmers feel about an impending change in government, and if there are differences between demographics or regions, as in East versus West. And there are some differences. And so head on over to the site, RealAgriculture.com. I'm sure Sean will be covering more of this week, but if you want to check that out, we've also got essentially how farmers are feeling on whether or not a conservative government would be more positive for agriculture, and lining that up with some of the demographics in the regions as well. So check that one out too. This week, bit different this week. I will actually be hosting the Rapid Fire on Thursday, so looking forward to that, and we'll be back for the panel on Friday. So without further ado, let's get to today's show. And with me after the break, you'll hear from Peter Wheat Pea Johnson and Joanna Follings on wheat row spacing right after this.
There's power, and then there's superpower. Advancing the unstoppable superpower of pre-seed from New Farm. Take control, eliminate weed competition, and start clean in spring. Manage weeds early in canola, cereals, and pulses. Conquer, Goldwing, Thunderhawk, and Blackhawk EVO. Convenient formulations and multiple modes of action. Add more power to glyphosate, more benefits to your burn down. Go to newfarm.ca/burndown.
If you're involved in the agriculture industry, it's important to stay informed on all the latest issues affecting your business. At RealAgriculture.com, we offer fast, reliable news, information, and insights to help you keep on top of all of the latest in Canadian agriculture. Visit RealAgriculture.com and sign up for our free daily newsletter covering everything from news, agronomy, animal agriculture, and much more. Visit RealAgriculture.com/subscribe today.
I'm Lyndsey Smith from RealAgriculture.com. Join me Monday nights for The Agronomists, a 1-hour live and interactive show broadcast across YouTube, Facebook, and X. Monday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern, I host expert agronomists from all over the country to give you answers to some of the toughest agronomic questions. Join us live or catch the replay Tuesday morning. That's The Agronomists with me, Lyndsey Smith, Monday nights live at 8 p.m. Eastern. Welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio Channel 147, Sirius XM. I am your host, Lyndsey Smith, and hey, RealAg listeners, Canterra Seeds has 8 bags of their new CS 4100 LL Liberty Link canola available to be won by one lucky listener. Visit Canterra.com/RealAg to find out more and to enter. Yes, that is correct. This is for you, for the RealAg listener. Head on over, Canterra.com/RealAg to enter to win 8 bags of a new canola hybrid courtesy of Cantera Seeds. All right, we're going to hop now to the latest wheat school. This is Peter Wheat Pete Johnson and Joanna Follings with OMAFA. Yep, I'm still going to say it that way. In conversation with Bern Tobin about choosing row spacing for your wheat.
And I'm here today with Joanna Follings, the cereal specialist with the Ontario Minister of Agriculture, Food and Agribusiness, OMAFA. And we are here yet again to talk about the YEN program, the Great Lakes Yield Enhancement Network. It's 2024. We've got new results. Joanna, let's start with the YEN program. How big has it gotten? Because it's incredible how growers want to grow better wheat.
Yeah, it's amazing. So in 2021, we started with 43 farms, and now in 2024, we're up to 184 farms across a number of states. The first year, we started with Michigan and Ontario, and now we've got Michigan, Ontario, Ohio, New York, all the way to Washington, North Carolina, Kentucky, you name it. Everyone's getting involved.
Yeah. Okay, so I just got to say, I don't think Washington and North Carolina are Great Lakes states, but nonetheless, it's so cool that growers want to grow better wheat. So, 2024 results, where are we at? Who's the big winner?
So really excited. This year's winner is Nick Suen from Michigan. Nick had a yield of 171.99 bushels per acre. And another fan favorite up in the top three is Jeff Crone. He had 170 bushels per acre. And last but not least, in third place, we had an Ontario grower at 160 bushels, and that was John Kilburn.
Yeah, and so, by the way, at 171.9, it's 172. Let's be real, okay? It's 172 bushel. And what, all the Ontario people listening, number 1 and number 2 are both Michigan growers. Come on, Ontario, let's get with the program here. So, Joanna, really cool. As we go through the whole YEN program, there's some things I think that have been consistent every year. If I'm a wheat grower, what are the 3 or 4 things that I have to do or have to look at to know if I'm going to be a top wheat grower?
For sure. I think there's 3 main things that seem to come out year over year. One of those being biomass. The more biomass we have, the more photosynthetic area we have there to capture that solar radiation. Year over year, we see biomass really pays when it comes to yield.
Yeah, but that biomass probably isn't a rocket science thing, right? Because grain is just a proportion of the total weight of the plant. So if I don't have big total weight, pretty hard to get big grain yields,
Absolutely.
Right? So biomass, that's one, not rocket science, but remember, what else?
The other one is head counts. We seem to get really high yields when we're at the 800 to 1,000 heads per meter square, and these growers that are in the top 3 every year all get 900 plus heads per meter square year over year. And that comes out in all of the data. We just heads per meter square, the more heads we have, the more yield.
And that's really interesting because a lot of the high yield wheat growers worldwide are lower head counts than what we are here in the Great Lakes or in North America, which speaks a little bit maybe to the different climate, perhaps different varieties, different genetics in terms of how that genetics respond. And there's one other thing though, right, Joanna?
Yeah, and another thing that plays into this is 1,000 grain weight. And so we're seeing that those growers who are able to keep that crop canopy nice and green and photosynthesizing later in through that grain fill period, we're able to bring that 1,000 grain weight up. And I think that's also what some of these growers are doing, these other parts of the world where they do have lower heads per meter square, is that 1,000 grain weight is able to compensate for some of that.
Yeah, absolutely. So our 1,000 grain weight is often 35 grams per 1,000 kernels. The yield winners are often at 50 grams per 1,000 kernels. Nonetheless, 1,000 grain weight is about a 5% difference between the top 20% and the bottom 20%. 5% is still worth chasing. So, okay, if those are the 3 things that are kind of always coming to the forefront, from a management standpoint, what does Wheat Pete do when he goes to his wheat field to get there?
Well, the first thing we got to do is focus on our planting date. If you want to grow big wheat, you need to be planting that wheat crop on time. The high yielding growers in 2024 in 2023 had an average of 6 days earlier than those that were the lower yielding. And actually in 2022, that window was even bigger at 11 days. And as we know, in the fall, when things start to cool off, those 6 days can make the biggest difference when it comes to your final yield.
Yeah, incredible. This year, 2024 Ontario, you can tell the fields that were planted on September the 29th versus September the 30th versus October the 1st. Even today, it's October the 24th today, we can see the difference because every one of those days was 20 growing degree days, and every 100 growing degree days is another growth stage. So that was like a fifth of a growing stage ahead, and it's massive. Yeah. You don't think one day matters, particularly one day early, but one day early matters more than anything else. Now, let's move in. So those are kind of the key things, and there's other things that we've talked about before. But what else have we learned from the YEN program? What are the nuances that have sort of jumped out as we look at the high yield growers? Is there anything else that we can tell the growers that they should look at?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that really stands out with some of the high yielding growers, and Jeff Crone being one of them, is a narrow row spacing. Those on 5-inch rows versus 7.5-inch rows seem to be able to get those higher yields with that narrow row spacing and at lower seeding rates too.
Yeah, and so that's, I mean, both Jeff and Nick Seward, right?
Yeah.
They're both 5-inch growers, and they're both been consistently in the top 3 over years.
Yes.
And that kind of pushes you to say, well, maybe there's something to narrower row widths, but it's also interesting that they're often at lower seeding rates. Mm-hmm. So some really cool work by Manny Singh out of Michigan State University, where they're precision planting 5-inch rows, and they're seeing some pretty significant yield increases. One of the things that kind of jumps out of that research is this German work that looks at if the seeds are closer than 1/2 inch together, 1 centimeter together, you get some plant-to-plant competition, right? And so you kind of look at that and say, wow, what about broadcasts then? Does that work?
So surprisingly, in some scenarios, broadcasting does work as well. And maybe the idea there is that we don't get that same competition in the seed to seed. But we know there are challenges with broadcast, so it's not necessarily a road we want to go down. But there is something to this, idea of having those seeds dispersed more evenly and being able to fully express themselves, so to speak.
Yeah, that is kind of cool because, Wheat Pete thinks that wheat is a real crop. And growers get all the gaga about corn and corn planting date or depth rather, and corn emergence. And now we're going to tell growers, with wheat, that doesn't matter. You broadcast it, you disc it in. It doesn't matter that some seeds are on the soil surface and some seeds are 4 inches deep. But Pete thinks it does, dang it, because when we plant with a precision planter, with a corn planter unit, we still get higher yields. That depth does matter. You lose on the depth with broadcast, but you probably gain it back with seed-to-seed spacing so we don't get the bunches. Controlled spill devices are drills. They bunch them like crazy. So before we finish up, I want to just talk about what have the researchers learned out of the YEN program?
We've learned so much, but one of the things that has really stood out this year is how we look at and how we calculate yield potential. So we look at temperature, we look at solar radiation, we look at soil available water, and one of the things that we assume in that is our rooting depth. And one of the things that we're finding with these high yielding growers is we have some of these growers exceeding what we expect their yield potential to be. So we had one grower this year, Jeff Crone, he was actually 155% of his yield potential. And so it's
155. Okay, 155% of your yield potential clearly shows us the algorithm needs some work, right?
Exactly. And so the thinking there is, one, maybe we're underestimating or overestimating our rooting depth. But the other piece is maybe that some of these fields that continue to come on top year over year have access to water below the soil surface that we're not accounting for. Perhaps there's a elevated water table, or perhaps there's some sort of moisture below that the roots are able to access, and it almost acts like subsurface irrigation, and we're not accounting for that as much in the model as maybe we should be.
Yeah, so really cool. So we've learned a bunch of things out of the YEN. I mean, planting date is everything because it drives those key factors. The stay green is important because it drives 1,000 grain weight. Row width is something I think a lot of us can look at. Also, seed-to-seed placement. I think that's really cool. But the last thing that I think is really interesting is that solar radiation is pretty much the same. Doesn't seem to be a big factor. But water and water availability, and maybe that's why some fields are always the highest yielding, right?
Definitely.
Yeah, very cool.
And everybody remember, what does Peter want you to do? And Joanna too, of course. It's grow great wheat. Absolutely. Okay. Thanks to Pete, Joanna. Thanks to Byrne for recording all that one. Let's hop to a break and I'll be back with today's product spotlight right after this. Make your neighbors envious with CDC NV CWRS. Introducing CDC NV CWRS, the latest wheat variety now available for Plant 25 from Alliance Seed. This semi-dwarf wheat delivers impressive yields, early maturity, outstanding standability, and a robust disease package. With CDC Envy, your wheat crop will be the talk of the town. Learn more and find your nearest retailer at allianceseed.com or call 1-877-270-2890.
If you only listen to RealAg Radio, you only get half the picture. For greater insight into the issues that affect farming, tune in to RealAgriculture.com. Crops, livestock, machinery, farm management, and the markets, even food and travel. Real Agriculture Online digs deeper into the topics that affect the way you work and live. So get connected today. Read, watch, and listen to the people who know at RealAgriculture.com.
Peter Johnson at WheatPete, RealAgriculture.com. I'm the host of The Word, and I love doing The Word. I love the questions. I love the challenges. I love having to apply agronomics to all over the globe and areas outside of my normal jurisdiction. Also, I love the feedback the most, where growers challenge me, tell me about their plot results, help me to learn. The Word, absolutely the best part of my day.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio, Channel 147, Sirius XM. I am your host, Lyndsey Smith, and it is time for today's Product Spotlight. Joining me today, it's Mike Schaefer. He's the Field Sales Manager with Nuseed, based in North Dakota. Welcome here, Mike.
Thank you, Lyndsey. Great to be here.
So then, Mike, looking at omega-3 canola production, it's seen significant growth in North Dakota, Montana, Minnesota, in that upper Midwest. Why do you think we're seeing the growth of the omega-3 canola production? And what's so exciting about this system?
Yeah, so I think, we're bringing a strong ROI in combination with the premiums that we offer. And the varieties, we've had back to 2018-19, the varieties have come a long ways as well for output and consistency and management. That's been a big player in it. And then the story's great too. You got farmers feeding farmers, so that support system has been great. And also the other thing that I find unique is, for this sales season, we've got like gummies that we can hand out, and these growers can try and taste and see the benefits of what they're producing. And it's bringing it full circle back to local again. And I think it's a neat story.
Tell me more about the Nuseed product pipeline.
Yeah, so I've been doing this since 2019, and the varieties have come a long ways since. I don't know what we've flushed through the system, probably close to 10 varieties by now. And each new variety has brought its own advantages to the region where they're fit. We've got a nice R&D department that's looking at an extensive pipeline of germplasms, and we look at plant structure, yield, oil qualities. There's several factors that go into play on bringing a variety forward, and each one that we're bringing forward is bringing advantages to the grower from a management perspective and an output perspective on yield. We are working on a pod shatter line to come out in a few years. It's going to be a very limited release, but anytime you can mitigate risk from a harvest standpoint, growers like that. So we're excited about that.
All right. So, of course, it is that time of year to be making those key decisions for next year's growing season. What's in it for the grower? Why should a grower in the upper Midwest be looking at adding the omega-3 canola production system to their lineup?
Yeah, from a current canola grower standpoint, risk mitigation is a big thing on farms today. If you're currently a canola grower, take a stab at growing a portion of your canola acres into our program. New canola growers, from a soil health benefit down to chemistry, glufosinate, a great cleanup tool on the farm. From a program perspective, though, we've got delivery windows, which growers asked for. They wanted to have more control on when they bring their bushels in. There's a long list here, so I got to make sure I get them all in. There's premiums associated with each window too. So when those windows fill, they're full, and we're shifting back to whatever is available. There is a 10 bushel act of God on this contract, which is great. Act of God does not exist a whole lot anymore. The additional incentives, the big ones, we've got an early commit program where you pick up $1.50 with an ITG signed up by December 5th. And we really appreciate our grower base, and returning growers will pick up another $1 a hundredweight. And then we've got a crop input incentive, anywhere from $15 to $20, depending on the per acre, depending on the amount of acres that you do. It's tiered from 300 to 1,000, 1,000 to 1,600, and 1,600 and up. And that is a check back to you during or after, shortly after the growing season. So that's a nice positive in the checkbook at the end of the year. And growers really appreciate that program. We've ran with that for a couple of years now. Don't know how long it'll be here, but it's one that makes the program shine.
And cash flow is pretty darn important. So that helps too. Yes, absolutely. All right. Now, of course, where can then growers in the upper Midwest who are interested, who like what they hear, where can they go for more information on the omega-3 production system? Yeah, just a quick Google search, omega-3 canola. I'll bring you right to, there's a box there that you can get an interest form filled out, and then that gets fired off to us FSMs out in the countryside, and we get you in touch with the right people. Otherwise, if you know of an omega-3 dealer in your area, please get in touch with them, or reach out to us FSMs if you've got our number, and we'll get you in touch with the right people. All right. Sounds wonderful. Mike, thanks so much for joining me on the show today. Thank you. All right. We'll be back with more RealAg Radio right after this.
If you're serious about agriculture, RealAg's got you covered.
For over 10 years, we've listened to and shared what producers have to say about everything from policy to agronomy from coast to coast.
Keep up with the latest in Canadian agriculture at RealAgriculture.com through daily newsletters, and check out our YouTube channel.
Thanks for joining us in the RealAg community as we continue to cover and serve North American agriculture. There's a reason we call it the Corn School. Videos on everything from planter setup to weed control, field trial results, and the latest yield strategies. The Corn School on RealAgriculture.com has the information and advice you need to help you succeed. Brought to you by Pride Seeds and BASF. Corn School episodes are available at cornschool.com, from RealAgriculture.com, or as a podcast in your favorite podcast app. Check out the latest Corn School episode today.
To RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio Channel 147 Sirius XM. I am your host for the day, Lyndsey Smith, and this segment is brought to you by Brandt Agricultural Products. The Brandt High-Speed Disc is made to manage residue, condition seedbeds, level ruts, and reclaim wetlands in the most challenging conditions. Lead the field with a lineup of versatile high-speed discs from Brandt and achieve better results with every pass. And receive up to a $12,000 rebate for a limited time. Visit brandt.ca for more. We hop now to a conversation that Amber Bell had with John Duynisveld, I hope I'm saying that right, talking about the inclusion of seaweed or kelp in cattle diets and the potential impact this could have on reducing overall methane emissions from cattle.
Yes, that's correct. We had a trial that started in the fall of 2023 where we had bred heifers that we were feeding different levels of kelp to. So we had some with no kelp, some with 0.5%, 1%, and 2% kelp. So we kept track of all their growth and intake data, and then over the winter we looked at how much methane they were producing.
And what inspired you to take on a project like that? Because you do a whole bunch of different things, I know, when it comes to studying cattle, and then you're a rancher as well. So, yeah, what inspired that? Well, there's just been such an interest in looking at different ways that we can try to reduce the amount of methane that comes from cows. They do produce a fair bit of methane. And, there's different arguments about the true importance of that when you look at carbon sequestration and that sort of thing. But anyway, here in the Maritimes, we happen to have a lot of different sources of kelp that exist out there. The particular product that we are working with, it comes from a place on PEI. And the PEI government was interested in
in seeing what the potential was for this kelp product to reduce methane emissions. Oh, dear me, it'd be 2 or 3 years ago, there was a really big reduction in methane achieved in Australia with a seaweed product that they were using down there. So that kind of, sparked the interest in what some of our local products might be able to do that way.
That's amazing. And just kind of briefly, what did the research look like? What did the project entail?
So we started off it was a group of, I think it was 20 heifers. And so we mixed this kelp with their diet every day. So they were getting a mix of silage and barley and a little bit of soybean, kind of balanced everything up for them. And so essentially, like for the production part of the trial, we actually used the automatic feed weighing system. So it weighs how much feed they eat, every mouthful of feed they eat, basically. So we can have pretty good data on how much they eat. We were weighing them regularly to get an idea on the weight gains and feed efficiencies. That was sort of the easy part of the trial. Because then after that, we put the cattle into the methane collection head boxes. So that's a little more complicated, where we have the cows. They go into these, but essentially just their head itself goes into the box. So they're in a stall that holds them still. So we adapt them to being comfortable in these head boxes, and for 24 hours we collect all the gases that come from these head boxes, and we sample every hour to see what the methane concentration is.
That's amazing. And what were the results? Were there any results that you found surprising, particularly?
Well, I'll just back up a tiny step on this. So this particular kelp product that we were working with, a former colleague of mine at the Nova Scotia Agriculture College had done work with this, almost 20 years ago now. And he had used artificial rumens with that. So basically you have these glass jars that you put rumen fluid and all the rumen contents from a cow in there, and you can feed different things and measure some of what's going on. And interestingly, he had found 15% reduction in methane emissions with these artificial rumens. But this was before methane was really a big excitement. Like, this is back in the early 2000s. Anyway, with our 1% kelp in the diet of these cattle, we found, depending upon which metric you're looking at, we found between 11 and 14% reduction in methane.
Wow, that's a lot.
Well, it is. I mean, when you look at the Australian data where they found like 80-90% reductions, it seems like not a lot. But realistically, when we talk about the goal that has been set for beef production to reduce methane or reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 30% by 2030, that's getting us pretty well halfway there.
Right. So you're on the East Coast.
Yes.
Like you said, kelp is fairly readily available. The West Coast would probably experience something similar. So what about all the prairie provinces? Where would you see that going?
Well, actually, the place that we were working with, they ship all over North America. Like tractor trailer, those stuff go out each week. And they're actually relatively small in the scheme of things, too. So, if you look, I know Newfoundland has places that do kelp. There's a couple of places in Nova Scotia that produce kelp. And it's all produced for a variety of different means, like reasons. Some of it's like food grade, some of it's for fertilizer for gardens. But there's a lot of sources of kelp that, we can draw on from various parts, really around the world for that matter. But yeah, we do have, people that are in the business of this. And I know there's one of the places in Nova Scotia that actually some of their stuff is grown in tanks on land as well. Like, so, there's opportunities to develop an industry around this if everything all works out economically and everything.
That's incredible. And so how exactly, I know that there's a lot of nutrients in kelp. How exactly does it affect and impact the methane production in cattle?
Well, I don't know that we're 100% clear on the actual mechanism that works in there. But we didn't look at the specifics of or organisms in the rumen were being impacted with this study. But in other projects, other research that's been done, there are certain types of bacteria that tend to do most of the methane production in the rumen. And these bacteria are impacted by some of the compounds that are in kelp. So they are not as effective or as productive as they would be if the kelp wasn't in the diet.
Wow, that's amazing. And did you notice any impact on the cattle outside of the actual methane reduction?
So we looked at intake and we looked at animal gains, and there was absolutely no difference in intake. And numerically, there were big differences in the animal gains, but our data had a lot of variability into it. So statistically, it was not a difference. But numerically, the animals that were supplemented with the kelp did grow a little bit from the ones that did not have the kelp. And that would be similar to some other research that's been done where essentially the theory is that if you are not having the energy, like when methane is lost from the rumen, it's, you can burn methane, it's natural gas, there's energy in the methane. So essentially when the methane is not being lost from the rumen, it can potentially be converted into other compounds, energy compounds that the animal can use, like different fatty acids and that then can become energy sources to grow. So
right,
again, we didn't see a significant difference in ours, but numerically it was there, and that would the numerical trend would agree with what other research has found.
Coming from a rancher perspective, economically, you're going to be wanting to have other benefits, whether that be maybe there's a bonus coming from the government, there's some grant funding maybe for it, or are there benefits that you would say you as a cattle producer would be willing to go and feed kelp to your cattle?
Well, kelp is a really good source of a lot of minerals and minerals in particular, things like selenium, which I realize in some parts of the world selenium is not a deficient mineral, but for us it is. There's there's different copper. There's a lot of different microminerals, and where kelp is a plant source, those nutrients are quite available. Whereas quite often when you get a mineral source, if it's something that's coming from a rock source, the availability tends to be relatively low. So as a mineral supplement, in addition to the methane reduction, there's sort of a benefit there that we have some confidence in. People have been feeding kelp to animals literally for thousands of years.
Right.
Just largely like animals that grew up sort of on seaside areas or islands off Scotland and things like that. But yeah, so it's not like a totally novel concept for animals to eat seaweed and kelp.
No, and completely anecdotally, but we've fed kelp to our cattle when they come in, and in order to avert pink eye, and it's worked. I don't know the research on that, but we haven't had pink eye issues when we fed kelp to the cattle. So,
and I, on my own farm, I've found, I've found the same result actually for preventing pink eye, and I haven't seen any research that would give an indication why that would be, whether it's a micromineral issue or something else.
Mm-hmm. Might be your next research study.
Well, possibly, yeah.
Do you foresee any challenges in scaling kelp feeding up in order for methane reduction, if this was something that people wanted to take on?
Well, it can be fed as part of a mineral mix, which, would make it, in that sense, it could be added to a mineral and fed to animals that are getting a mineral. But again, that would probably depend on context. In the eastern part of Canada, we tend to have smaller herds and smaller areas where we're pasturing. So it might be a little easier to ensure there's sort of that steady supply of mineral. I'm not sure how that would work in some of the bigger,
like a feedlot or
rangelands. I'm thinking rangeland actually. Which is the cow-calf side of it is probably where a lot, there's a fair bit of potential to reduce methane. But
so, what are your next steps now that this project is done? Where do you foresee this research going from here on out?
Well, the research was funded in part from Living Labs from Prince Edward Island, and their next step there is to take it onto farms and see how effectively they can get people to incorporate this, and then hopefully be able to measure sort of on a farm scale what's going on with the methane emissions from those cattle that are getting it.
So cool. All right, we're gonna end that there. Thank you, of course, to Amber and to John for that conversation. some super cool work happening there. And I like kelp too. So yeah, there you go. Anyway, all right, we're going to take a break and I will be back. I've got a segment from the Agronomists from last Monday where we talked about fall fieldwork, and we talked quite a bit about manure applications in the fall and some pros and cons, and of course what to consider to decrease the potential for loss or for an environmental impact that we don't want, of course. So that is coming up right after the break.
Advanced canola trait technology is here. And it's soon to be the talk of the town. Optimum Gly delivers excellent yield potential and agronomic trait performance. Improved crop safety. Enhanced weed control. And a wider window of application. You're going to want to see this. Learn more at OptimumGly.ca.
What were the issues in your fields this year? Did you do a soil sample? What is your soil sample telling you about some of the nutrient issues that you might be having going into next year? What herbicides did you use? What residues you might be concerned about? What weed issues did you have? What crop residues did you have? How well do you know your fields?
Get the answers to all the questions you have about your pulse crop at the Pulse School on RealAgriculture.com. Welcome back to Real Ag Radio here on Rural Radio Channel 147, Sirius XM. I am your host on this Tuesdays with Lyndsey Smith, and this segment is brought to you by CDC Endure from Alliance Seed. Take your oat game to the next level with CDC Endure from Alliance Seed, one of the top yielding varieties in Prairie Provincial Yield Trials. Available from authorized Alliance Seed retailers, visit allianceseed.com for more information. All right, as promised, we hop now to part of the conversation that I had last Monday with Christine Brown with the Ontario Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Agribusiness, Glen Arnold with Ohio State University, and also Curtis Cavers with Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, based in Manitoba. So as always, this is just a snippet of the entire program. It goes live Monday nights, 8 p.m. Eastern, except for, of course, holidays. And you know what? I really wish you would join me for the live program, because the whole point is that people can ask questions while we're having these conversations with these experts. And so there is a really cool group of people that I appreciate so much that actually show up pretty much every Monday, regardless of the topic, even if they're busy in the field or even if it's a tough time of year to find some time. And I really do appreciate each and every one of you that listen live. But I also know that there's plenty of people that will listen later in the week. They'll watch it on YouTube. They'll watch it on the website. And I appreciate that too, because I get feedback later in the week. But if you've got time Monday nights, you can head on over to realagriculture.com/agronomists or /live. Whenever we go live, it goes there too. If that's easy enough, or find us on YouTube. You can check it out on X and on Facebook as well. It streams to all those platforms, 8 p.m. Eastern on Monday nights. And so let's get to a clip from last week's episode of The Agronomists, which was the residue question. We've had lots of great taglines to go with this one. It's a good question. Dr. Dave Hooker says, does the residue cover percent depend on whether the residue is anchored or not? Christine, what say you? Does it need to be part of the soil?
I think in our area we have probably more water erosion issues than wind erosion, and there's a lot of times where if you get a big rainstorm, there will be a huge pile of residue at the area where it all ponds. So I think anchored residue is very important, especially if you've got a wheat field and you don't want it buried in corn residue. Wind erosion, I don't have as much experience, but again, I think anchored is going to make a bigger difference.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so it brings us to, and as Glen has shared as well, we do fall passes at times to prepare for spring. Our springs might be too wet, and therefore the fall gives us an opportunity to get some things done that perhaps when time is tight in the spring, it buys us some time in the spring. But there's, of course, some drawbacks, and as we've hit on, erosion can be one of those drawbacks, potentially. or the weather does work against us and the things we want to do in the fall doesn't happen. Christine, maybe we'll go there on thinking about manure application, especially. We do see, quite a bit of manure that goes on late in the season, but that's not, of course, always the goal. How much planning should we be doing as far as should we be aiming for, say, earlier in the season and trying to avoid the fall season for manure applications, and why?
Yeah, and I think Glen started saying that earlier on, where we have as many opportunities during the growing season to apply manure as possible, and so that means planning ahead. And so in our part of Ontario, where we're lucky enough to have a fair bit of wheat acreage, that wheat comes off in the summer, and so that gives a lot of farmers a great opportunity when the conditions are usually a little bit better to, or hopefully most times better, to apply that manure. And then there's still going to be some application that has to happen in the fall, but hopefully then the workload is spread out a bit so that we've got some good weather. And this year we've been really lucky. I would say that in my area, at least, a good percentage of the corn is off. Almost all the soybeans are off. It's been fairly dry, so it's been perfect weather for manure application so far, where other years sometimes harvest doesn't happen until early December. It's been wet, and sometimes the first opportunity for manure application is sometime in December, when suddenly you get a week of good weather. And that makes it pretty tough to get a lot of workload done in a quick amount of time, and to get that manure incorporated so that you don't get the nutrient runoff into the water courses.
Right. Yep. And we've got, actually, Glen sent some really cool pictures of different ways that we can get that manure on there. But Mark shares in his heavy clays, if we don't want water erosion after manure application. Post-wheat harvest, only a growing cover crop in the fall will hold it in place. Straw residue just doesn't cut it. Glen, you're saying yes. Expand on that one.
I was just going to say we had an unusually large amount of wheat acreage this year, which really played in well for manure application, because I opened up a lot of fields, and even farmers that weren't into manure application or receiving manure, because their fields were available and we had such tremendous dry, and so it was made for good conditions to apply manure. So we had a lot of it put on fields that normally wouldn't receive. So many of our large dairies are pumped down nicely, and then our farmers who have their own buildings are hard at work after soybeans and corn came off, getting that manure out there. But yeah, I agree. We want to get a cover crop if we possibly can, because the ammonium portion of that manure is going to get away from us. We estimate at least 50% of that will get away from us in any given winter. So if we can convert that ammonium nitrogen into stems and roots and leaves, and that's an organic form of nitrogen, and that'll be a slow release over a number of years. So if you don't do it, you're going to donate it away. So I really encourage cover crops as much as possible in wheat stubble fields, and even our dairy farmers are really good about that too, because they'll harvest their silage, they'll get manure out there, then they'll get triticale or cereal rye on those fields. That'll overwinter, and that'll become feed next May or June, and then they'll plant silage corn again and repeat the whole process year after year after year.
Christine, Instead, in Ontario, we just argue over whether or not it's okay to put manure out. So we have, it does, though, it creates a bit of a gray area. So, Christine, as Curtis says, we don't want it on frozen ground. But as you mentioned, sometimes we do get a window, perhaps early in the winter, where the ground is not frozen yet. The weather warms up a little. The ground can carry the equipment, and we do go. What do we need to keep in mind to make sure that we're making the right decisions in a winter application?
Yeah, so my rule of thumb is, if you can apply it and incorporate it the same day, good to go.
Okay.
Because the definition between frozen, and the trouble with calendar is there's a big difference in weather in Windsor compared to Sudbury or Thunder Bay.
Yes.
Huge difference. So if it's, you get those days where it's frozen in the morning, it thaws out during the day a bit, it freezes at night again. You get that in the fall and in the spring. And if we can apply it and we can incorporate it that same day and not risk the runoff, then that's a common sense approach in my mind.
Okay. Glen, do you have the argument over not spreading on snow? Because that's a thing in Ontario that we throw hands over.
Well, we have different rules based on the size of your livestock operation. For example, all permitted farms, which are farms of 1,000 animal units or larger, are not permitted to do winter manure application on snow or frozen ground. And so that's why they build satellite ponds and other places that they can run with if you have a particularly bad fall and we can't get manure applied. And then some of ours are watershed specific. There's one watershed in the state that has a ban between December 15th and March 1st on manure application. And then the biggest thing I would emphasize on that is that it's a judgment call, but regulators and people who enforce rules have really cracked down quite a bit in the last 3 to 5 years. And it really isn't worth the risk anymore to run out there and land apply if conditions aren't really suitable, as Christine said, where you can get it incorporated pretty rapidly. You're way further ahead to call a dairy farmer and say, hey, I've got to move a couple loads of manure down to your place and do that, and then and buy yourself time if you were one of those who could not get their manure applied in the fall. But we've had a phenomenal fall. There won't be very many good excuses a person could come up with for having to apply manure in the winter. But I just know that we do not freeze solid and stay frozen. We warm back up, and then we get some moisture. So anything you land apply in the wintertime and don't get worked in, just as sure it's going to reach a watershed or a ditch water someplace, and then the agency people will write you up for that.
Jason Vought's got a great question on talking tillage. What type to use and when, high-speed disc versus others. This is to talk managing residue. So, Curtis, I'll go to you with this one. Certainly, with a shift to more corn acres in Manitoba, you've got some residue issues. We always have them with our wheat and lots of biomass. So what have you been working on as far as fall tillage and the actual type of tool we can choose?
Yeah, thanks, Jason, for the question there. I'll take a stab at it here. Tillage is one of these things that it's like a lifestyle type of question, and I'm not here to judge or to say one way's better than the other or anything like that, but it is a personal choice on these things, and you need to understand what the conditions are and what soils or what fields you're dealing with when you go into this, because you're going to get different outcomes in different years and different outcomes on different fields. So, if you've got heavier land and it's a wet year, then obviously tillage to manage those high residues is probably a good thing and a necessary thing to avoid problems in the spring. If it's a dry year, and particularly on lighter, more erodible soils, then it's much easier to, say, steer clear or minimize how much tillage you want to do so that you don't put yourself in a situation where you're going to have soils prone to wind, water, and other forms of erosion and that. The tricky part and the hardest part is when you've got variable landscapes and unpredictable weather, like we've had, wet springs, dry falls, or everything else in between, and you've got these fields where you've got hilltops that have erosion or tend to be droughty with not a lot of residue cover on it, along with adjacent to them depressions that can be wet and difficult to manage without tillage. So it becomes a difficult thing, and it's maybe where you start having to think like a precision ag approach to something like this. Maybe you do till the field, but only certain parts of the field, or you use certain types of tillage equipment, but you got to, use them a certain way and maybe not for the entire field.
We are going to leave it there and wrap up today's show. Thank you so much for joining me here on RealAg Radio. If you'd like to get in touch, you can zip me an email, lsmith@realagriculture.com. I will be back on Thursday for the Farmer Rapid Fire. We'll talk to you then. Cheers, everybody.